Malcolm Gladwell is probably the best-selling nonfiction writer in America. He's sold many millions of books based on very simple ideas. Blink. Should you trust your first impression? The Tipping Point. How does a fad become a sensation? His new book, which is my favorite, is called Outliers. In it, he explores what makes a person successful. Why do some talented people flame out early while others go on to brilliant careers? His main point is this: success doesn't have much to do with talent. Instead, he says it's almost always a product of hard work and of the culture in which one lives. Malcolm Gladwell, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
One of my favorite examples is actually your first example, where you talk about hockey players. So, and the reason I think you talk about them is because what could be more meritocratic than sports? You just, you know, it's not who your parents are. It's just a question of raw talent and hard work, it would seem. But what do you find?
Well, you find, some lovely work by a series of psychologists. What you find is that an overwhelming majority of hockey players are born in the first 3 months of the year, elite hockey players. And the same is true, by the way, of soccer around the world. And the reason for that is that the system under which age-class hockey and age-class soccer are organized has, excuse me, has as the cutoff date January 1st. And so from the very beginning, when we pick young kids to pull them out and put them on all-star teams and give them special coaching and special encouragement, we're looking at groups of children who are all 9 years old, and we're saying those three are the best, let's pull them out. Well, who is the best at 9 years old? Well, it's children who are the eldest in their class, those born closest to the cutoff date.
So the ones who are 9 years, 10 months, 9 years, 11 months, and 9 years, 11 and a half months, who tend to be the best.
When you're 9 years old, 11 months can be 4 inches in height. It can be 25 pounds. It can be the difference between being a klutz and someone who's incredibly coordinated. And so we think there that what we've done is identify people who have extraordinary individual talent. We actually haven't. We've created a system that confers a special benefit on children born in a certain part of the year, and that benefit persists. And those kids are the ones who end up 10 years later playing all-star, playing in the NHL, or playing professional football or soccer around the world.
Do you think this applies to, I don't know, finance? That there were some kids who seemed at a young age a little bit more talented at math, and that they get a certain amount of attention by teachers and parents, and they're told they're smart, and then it's reinforced.
Yeah, this principle in psychology is called the Matthew effect, after the line in the Bible, to he who has much more will be given, right? It's this idea that it's called cumulative advantage, which is small initial advantages mushroom over time. The best data we have is on reading. A very, very small difference in reading ability at a very young age quickly mushrooms into a large difference. Why? Because if you're a little bit better at reading at the age of 6, you'll read more, right? Because reading is easier and more pleasurable. And that little extra increment of reading that you do causes you to read even better than the person behind you. And the cycle reinforces itself until you have, by the time when kids are 6, the difference in the amount they read is like this. When they're 12, the same kids, the difference is this. It's because of this snowballing effect that happens with small initial advantages growing.
Tell the story of the Beatles with regard to practice.
The Beatles are a lovely example because we think that their story begins with the invasion of America in 1964, right? These 4 fresh-faced, practically teenagers who burst on the scene. You know, nothing could be further from the truth. They spend, the really critical periods, they spend 2 years in Hamburg, Germany, as the house band in a strip club, playing 8-hour sets 7 days a week for months at a stretch. They have one of the most extraordinarily intensive apprenticeships in rock and roll. And if you think about what it takes to play, I mean, the typical set for a rock band is what, an hour and a half? They did 8-hour sets, day in, day out. If you think about that, you realize if you force a group of young musicians to play together over in that way for months at a stretch, you're forcing them to master all kinds of different genres, to learn how to play together well, to write songs. I mean, everything you need to do, particularly at the dawn of rock and roll, to be the most dominant band of your generation, requires some kind of apprenticeship. And lo and behold, they have it. And I would argue, and many agree with me, that no Hamburg, no Beatles. you know, they're just not the band that we remember unless they had that kind of intensive training.
But of course, it raises an interesting question to me, which is, you could imagine a lot of other bands being told, I've got good news for you. You've got a great gig in Hamburg, Germany. The bad news is you're going to have to play 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they would have said, no way, we're not going to do it. So something about that group made them relish the opportunity to do enormous amounts of practice. And presumably that's true of some of these sportsmen and true of other people. That is, yes, it takes practice, but you need a certain mentality to want to practice, the hell out of it. You know,
what you have described is what I believe talent is. Talent is the desire to practice, right? It is that you love something or so much that you're willing to make an enormous sacrifice and an enormous commitment to that, whatever it is, task, game, sport, what have you. When people use that word, we usually talk about something inherent in you, right? And we think of something very specific. I don't think that's what talent is. I think talent is simply desire. It's what you said of the Beatles. Their talent consisted of their ability to see Hamburg as an opportunity, whereas 99 out of 100 bands would have seen Hamburg as a nightmare, which, by the way, it was. I mean, you could argue that the Beatles' talent was also an act of delusion, you know, to be able to see opportunity in Hamburg in 1959, you know, required at the very least, an extraordinary imagination.
And we will be back with Malcolm Gladwell.